A couple of weeks ago, Sarah and Megan and I went to the hockey game, and so we're walking down the concourse of the hockey rink, and I see my buddy Greg standing at the railing, and Greg looks at me and he does this. He goes like this. Gives me the head nod to come over. Doesn't say anything, just goes like this. So we walk over to Greg, and when we get over to Greg, he reaches into his pocket, and he pulls out a can, takes the lid off of it, and there's all these little white things in it. He holds them out to us, and we walk over there without a word, and we take one of these things, pop it in our mouth, and start sucking on it. It was butterscotch candy, and he started then telling us about butterscotch candies and how he bought these at Hender's Drugs and blah, 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 and how they're the best butterscotch candies he's ever had in his life and all this sort of stuff. But I got thinking about it afterwards. What a strange sort of thing to have happen, wouldn't you think? Like that could have been anything in that little canister, right? It could have been cyanide pills for all I know, right? We just walk up and throw one in our mouth and start eating it without a word from the guy. Why do I walk up to my friend Greg without a word from him or a word from me or a word of explanation, take whatever he offers me and throw it in my mouth without thinking about it? Why do I do that? Trust. Exactly. I know Greg, and I trust Greg. So Greg's not going to give me something harmful. Greg's not going to do something mean to me. Greg's going to be nice. And so without even questioning it, because I trust him, I act in a very specific way towards him, in a way that I wouldn't act towards someone else. If that was a complete stranger, if he looked a lot different than Greg did, I may not do what I did with Greg, but I trust him. And trust makes a huge difference. The word I want you to think about this morning is trust, and I want you to think about how it affects our lives. And I want you to think specifically about your trust in God this morning. I want to tell you that unless we have a real trust in a real God who's really doing something, then it changes everything in our lives. That idea of having a real trust is a big deal. And we're going to spend a few minutes just going through Scripture. I'm going to put a lot of Scriptures up on the screen. We're not going to read all of them. We're going to refer to most of them. So write them down if you want. Take a picture of them if you want. Ask me later. I'll give them to you if you don't get them written somehow. But go back and read them later. But most of these stories are well enough known that you're going to fill in parts for me. But every single one of them revolves around trust. And when we get done that part, then I'm going to give you the application that is actually the reason we need this idea. So I think it's actually bigger than what you're going to see initially, so hang on to the end. Trust changes everything. If you think about the fact that everything starts off in the Old Testament, everything starts off in the story of God revolving around trust. Back in the Garden of Eden, when God made Adam and Eve and he put them in the Garden of Eden and created everything, he put them there and he said, here's the deal we have now. The deal we are going to have is that you may eat of any tree in this garden. You may have anything that you want, except for the tree of what? The knowledge of good and evil. You may not eat from that tree. Every other tree you can eat from. I will look after you. I will care for you. I will give you everything you need. But do not touch that tree. That's a question of trust. That brings up a question of trust. One which Satan used when he shows up on the scene. Because Satan's question is, did God really say you couldn't eat from that one? Is there a reason why you can't eat from this one? Isn't it true that if you eat from this one, you'll become like God himself? He's questioning whether they really trust God or not. Whether they really trust God to be good to them or not. Whether they trust God is holding something back from them or not. And so they say, maybe we can't trust him. Maybe we better try it ourselves. And everything falls apart from there. Trust was the issue in the Garden of Eden. Jump ahead a few hundred years and we meet the man that we know as Abraham. At the time his name is Abram. God says to him in Genesis chapter 12 verse 1, the Lord said to Abram, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. All the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So here's God's offer to him. I'm going to take you from where you are and everything you know, everyone you know, and you're going to leave. And I want you to just go. And I will show you where you're going. I'm not telling you now where you're going, but trust me, I will lead you. And if you will trust me to lead you, I will make you a great nation. And you will bless all the people on the earth. Your descendants will be like the sands of the seashore. I will look after you. I will bless you. I will show you where you're going. I will make your name great. And the very next verse, verse 4 says, so Abraham left, as the Lord told him to. That is trust. That is Abraham saying, I don't know what this is going to look like. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what God has in store for me, but he's told me he will be good to me. He's told me he will look after me. He's told me this will be fine, so I will go. That's a relationship of trust. Trust that makes Abraham act in a way he wouldn't have acted otherwise. Jump ahead a few more 100 years and you come to the man named Joseph. I love the story of Joseph. If you get nothing else out of this in terms of Bible reading this morning, write down these chapters. Genesis chapter 37 through 50 and go read the story of Joseph sometime. Joseph's entire story is about the fact that he trusted God. And his whole story turns out, his whole life turns out in a certain way because he trusts God. Not because things were easy, not because things were simple, but because he continues to believe that God is trustworthy, that God is not going to harm him. And so when his brothers in chapter 37 sell him as a slave, and he ends up in the country of Egypt, for nothing that he had done, he had told his brothers a dream that God had given him. And he had told his brothers this dream, and it made them jealous, and they decided to get rid of him, so they sold him as a slave. And he finds himself down in Egypt, and he could have been bitter, and he could have been mad, but he continues to trust God, and he decides, well, God will do something with this. So in the next chapter, or 2 chapters over, in chapter 39, we're told that Joseph, because God is looking after him, Joseph becomes a servant in the house of this man named Potiphar. Potiphar is an official in Pharaoh's government. Potiphar has lots of money and lots of influence, and Joseph becomes his friend, his servant. A well-respected guy in the household. Everything looks like it's okay. God has been trustworthy. His life took a funny turn, but God's looking after him now. And then along comes Potiphar's wife. You know the rest of this story too, that Potiphar's wife comes along and says to Joseph, she liked Joseph's look, and she said, you should come to bed with me. And he refused to because he said God would not honor that. Joseph is trusting God and doing what God would want him to do. So Potiphar's wife makes up a story and says that Joseph attacked me. Joseph tried to take me, and so he gets arrested, and guess where he ends up? He ends up in jail. But Joseph continues to trust that God is looking after me. It's going to be okay. I don't know what's happening here, but I will not do anything that God does not want me to do. So, next chapter, chapter 40. He's sitting in jail now in Egypt, and he meets 2 people. He meets the cupbearer of the king, and the cupbearer and who? Who's the other guy?
The baker.
Pardon me? The baker. Yes, thank you. Meets these 2 guys. They are servants of the Pharaoh. He interprets some dreams that they have. They say, oh, you've been very good to us. You've been very helpful. Guess what? When we get out of jail, we'll get you out of jail too. We will put in a good word for you. Neither one does. And he ends up being stuck in jail even longer. But Joseph continues to trust. And Joseph continues to believe that God is looking after him, so he continues to wait. Gets another chance to interpret some more dreams, eventually gets to interpret Pharaoh's dream and gets out of jail at the end. Jump down to the chapter 42. In the end, there's a great big famine where his brothers live, and they come to Egypt to get some food. By now, Joseph is second in command in the country, and so he's able to feed his brothers, and he's got a chance now to be vengeful to them. His whole life has been messed up. His whole life has been topsy-turvy because his brothers hated him and sold him into slavery, and every time he turned around, something bad was happening, but he continued to trust God, and now he's got his chance. He's got his chance because his brothers are begging for his help, and he doesn't have to help them. He could be really mean to them. He decides to help them. He decides to forgive them. He decides to look after them. And then comes the great little verse in chapter 50 that you should just underline and think about. Here's Joseph's response to all those terrible things that happened to him along the way. Every time his life kind of looked like it was falling apart and then getting better, it would fall apart again. Here's what he says to his brothers. Chapter 50, verse 20, he says, you know what? His summation of the whole thing is, you intended to harm me, but God used it for good. Isn't that a beautiful thing? He says, you intended to harm me. I know you were out to get me. You thought you were going to get rid of me. You thought you were going to hurt me. But God used it for good. God used it for something that was right. So I trusted God, and guess what happened? God used all those horrible things for something good. Every part of Joseph's story revolves around who he trusts. And he continues to trust God. And that makes all the difference. Jump up to the New Testament for a second. Think about Jesus for a second. When Jesus first shows up on the scene, the temptations are the first thing that he goes through. Satan tempts him with 3 different temptations. And every single time, Satan offers him something, and Jesus comes back and says, no, I'm going to trust God. So Satan says, you know what, you're out here and you're hungry. You should turn these rocks into bread. And what does Jesus say? No, we can't do that. Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from God, right? I'm trusting God. Puts him up on the temple and says, jump off here and see if somebody will save you. And Jesus says, no, we don't put the Lord our God to the test. God's looking after me, but I'm not going to test him. I know he's looking after me. I trust him. Says to them at the end, I'll give you all these worlds if you worship me. And Jesus says, you don't worship anyone but God. That's where my trust is. Jesus starts his ministry by stating the fact that I am going to put my trust in my Father, and whatever else happens, that's what's going to happen. I'm going to trust him. So throughout his life, he says things like, I don't say anything that my Father doesn't tell me to say. I don't do anything that my Father doesn't tell me to do. I do exactly what he wants because I'm trusting him. Even down to the very last night in the Garden of Gethsemane, just before the cross, you remember Jesus' prayer, right? He prays, Lord, Father, take this cup from me, but not my will, but yours be done. I will trust you. I will do whatever it is you want me to do. I will see whatever it is you want me to see. I will go through whatever it is you want me to go through because my trust is in you. And that's what's going to make the difference. If you jump ahead to the Apostle Paul, turn over to that one for half a second in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. The Apostle Paul is talking about his ministry and the things that he's been through and what he's done as he served God over these years. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, down and around verse 23 or so, he starts talking about the things that have happened to him. And he says, are you people servants of Christ? I've more. I've worked much harder. I've been in prison more frequently. I've been flogged more severely. I've been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews 40 lashings, minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and day in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from rivers and in danger from bandits and in danger from my own countrymen, in danger from Gentiles, in danger from the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, in danger from false brothers. I've labored and toiled and often gone without sleep. I've known hunger and thirst and gone without food. I've been cold and naked. Beside everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for the churches. Who's weak and I don't feel weak? Who's led into sin and I don't inwardly burn? He looks at this great big list and he says, look at all these things. I've been almost killed 5 times. I've been beaten to the point I'm almost dead several times. I almost drowned in the sea. People hate me. I'm run out of every city I go to. And he says, you know what? That's great. That's okay. Because I'm trusting that God is looking after me. I don't need people to be nice to me. I don't need people to look after me because God is looking after me. And He will use those things. He will use my imprisonment. Several times when he writes his prison epistles, he says things like, my chains have advanced the gospel. He says, I wouldn't have chosen this, but God is using it, so I'll trust Him to look after me as this goes on. God is doing something with the things that are happening to me, and I'll just trust Him to work it out. In fact, he goes on in chapter 11 of 2 Corinthians there, he says, if I'm going to brag about anything, I'll brag about the hard things, because God's used them. And I've seen God working in them, and I'm going to trust God. So there's your biblical basis. Think of anyone. The question of whether they were successful or not was based on their trust or not. And those who were honored by God were those who said, I don't know what's going on right now. I don't know why this is happening. But I'm going to trust that God has it under control. That's the attitude we need to come to. Unfortunately, sometimes we get it backwards. And sometimes we get it wrong. We like to say things like, show it to me and I'll believe. Show me how faith works and then I'll believe it. But that's backwards. As I was thinking about this week, I got this email. And this little quote says this. Understanding is the reward of faith. Do you know that? Understanding is the reward of faith. Therefore, seek not to understand that you may believe, but believe that you may understand. That last idea, seek to believe that you may understand, is a trust statement. All these people here had no idea why it was working out. They didn't understand, but they believed. And because they believed, later on they understood. Seek not to understand that you may believe, but believe that you may understand. In other words, seek to be trusting. Seek to find that God is going to do something even when we don't understand it. Even when we can't nail it down. There are some things in the Word of God, there are some things in your faith that you better understand. You better be able to explain it. You better be able to talk about it. You better know what the answer is. But there are lots of things we don't know. There are lots of things you can't explain. There are lots of things that you're just going to have to take on blind trust, believing that there's a God who's doing something that you don't know yet. Bob Goff said it this way once. He said, we're following a God we can't see for a lifetime that we can't measure to an eternity that we can't comprehend because of a grace that we didn't earn. Faith isn't just a bunch of facts. Again, there are some facts you better know, but real faith doesn't rest on the facts. Real faith rests on trust. Trust in a God I don't see. Trust for as long as I live, however long that is. Trust to get me to a heaven that I don't even understand. Trust that something bigger is going on than what I can understand at this very moment. We need the big idea of a real, faithful, honest trust. So let me ask you today, do you live with that sort of attitude? Do you live with the belief that God is looking after things? Do you live with the belief that it's going to be okay? That God is with you. He's not apart from you. That He is acting, as Kendall talked about, like a puppy owner with their new puppy who's just caring for them and watching over them and doing everything they need. Do you believe in that kind of God? Or do you think you're in charge? Do you think you're running everything and He's going to come back and check on you someday? The biblical picture is that people who were following God and believing Him believed that He was at work, even when they didn't understand it. And here's the thing. That's a good thing. That's an attitude that prospers and makes us better and helps us, because you don't have enough information to know how things are going right now. Right? Isn't that true? In your life right now, you see things a certain way. You think your life is going a certain way, but you really don't have enough information to know what's actually happening. Do you understand that? You really have no idea. Let me tell you a story as we end here. Story is about a man named Noah McVicker. Noah McVicker lived in Cincinnati, Ohio. And he had a business. He had a company. His company's business was this. Back in the old days, before World War II, lots of houses in America were heated with either coal-fired furnaces or with wood-fired furnaces. The coal-fired ones in particular would leave soot all over the house. And so Noah McVicker developed a product, a putty, that you could take and you could buy, and you would go and buy his putty and you would go and clean your wallpaper with his putty. That was his company. You would take his putty and rub it on your wallpaper in your living room or whatever, and it would clean the soot off your wallpaper. He had a good business. Sold lots of that stuff for a long, long time. Then along came World War II. World War II comes along, people stop buying his product because it's non-essential. It doesn't really matter if your wallpaper has gunk on it or not when everybody's off at war. So his sales dropped a little bit. When World War II ends, everybody comes back and there's this boom of prosperity in the next couple of years. People want more stuff. People don't want to be heating their houses with coal-fired stuff anymore, and so natural gas becomes the new product that's heating people's homes. And guess what? When you heat with natural gas, you don't get all that soot on your wallpaper and you don't have to clean it anymore. So Noah McVicker's company that was struggling during the war now is almost bankrupt because nobody's buying his wallpaper cleaning putty anymore. Nobody wants it, nobody needs it. And he's desperate because his company looks like it's on the verge of bankruptcy. He has no idea what he's going to do next. So he brings in his nephew, guy named Joe McVicker, and he says to Joe, I need your help. I need you to help me figure out what we're going to do because I have no idea what's coming next. Joe McVicker has a sister-in-law. One day, Joe takes some of the wallpaper putty home, and his sister-in-law sees it. And she says, can I take that to the play school I work with? That looks like fun. She takes it to the play school, and the kids love it. Within 2 years, they changed the name from McVicker's Wallpaper Putty to Play-Doh. The guy who thought his company was falling apart, the guy who thought the world had changed so much, I have nothing to do with my stuff anymore, creates now, out of the same stuff he was selling before, creates the #1 selling toy of all time. Everybody's played with Play-Doh. Everybody knows the smell. If you pop that can right now, you can think of the smell of that Play-Doh, right? You know what that looks like. The guy who thought he was just about bankrupt became richer than he could ever imagine. He didn't know what was coming. Now, I'm not telling you that God made him figure out how to sell Play-Doh, but what I'm telling you is that if you were to talk to him just before this went to the play school, he would have thought his life was over. And it was just beginning, financially anyway. You don't have enough information to know what's happening next. You don't know how things really are right now. All you can know is either that you've got to fix it or God's looking after you. That's really all we know. So brothers and sisters, can we take the view that says, I don't know what's happening, but I believe God is looking after me. I believe it's going to be okay. I believe, like Joseph, he's going to take what was ever intended for harm and use it for good if I just keep serving him. I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to keep trusting. I'm going to keep believing, and something good is going to happen. As the proverb writer said, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. That's the key verse probably there. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he He will make your path straight. A real believing trust that doesn't give in to our fears, that doesn't give in to our doubts, that doesn't allow us to sit around and say, oh my goodness, what's going to happen next? But a real believing faith that says, I don't know what's happening yet. I don't know how it'll end. But I know God's in charge, and it'll be all right. Trust is essential for faith. Let's stand as we sing.